It is very popular to refer to your business as customer centered or customer led or customer driven or whatever the term is. We all like to think of ourselves as customer led. We all inherently know that we are in the business of helping customers get value. But for the vast majority of companies that we see, not to throw anybody under the bus, but for the most part, it's kind of lip service, because though they may have a great customer success team or great customer support, they haven't actually operationalized that customer understanding in a way that all the teams across the organization can actually act on.
Hello and welcome to Polyweb. I'm your host, Sara Landi Tortoli, and my guest today is Georgiana Laudi, co-founder and CEO of Forget the Funnel. In the past, she has advised companies such as SparkToro and Sprout Social. In this episode, Gia talks about the difference between being customer-led versus product-led companies, and she goes in depth into examples of how to identify your ideal customer and how to map their user journey in order to spot the biggest opportunities. Enjoy the episode. Gia, welcome to Polyweb.
Thanks so much for having me, Sarah.
All right. I think I'm going to start by asking you, what is customer-led growth?
Mm-hmm. And the question that soon follows usually is, and what's the difference between product-led growth, which is a very popularized approach as well. To be clear, customer-led growth is not meant to be in place of any growth other growth models like product-led growth. We love product-led growth. We work predominantly with product-led companies. But customer-led growth, what the essence of it is basically that you should be making decisions around what matters to your customers and operationalizing the most effective experience for them. So if you can deeply understand your customers, you can then operationalize their end-to-end experience with you and therefore give you the opportunity to optimize it from them being out in the world experiencing the problem that you solve all the way through to screaming your name from the mountaintops, basically, and being a long-term, high LTV, high value, very happy, customer. So that's kind of the essence of customer-led growth. It's a lot of people have started talking about customer-led growth in the past couple of years as being more around like the customer success team. Is it customer success? Is it customer marketing? And what we believe is that it's actually at this base below, sort of more foundationally, you would layer on product-led growth or a sales-led motion or product-led sales or, marketing-led programs. Basically, customer-led growth lets you figure out how to layer in these different growth models.
Okay. And for listeners who are not familiar with the definition of also product-led growth, could you give us a definition of that? And maybe we can go into details of how the two models differ practice.
Yes. So this, Dash-led growth movement that has happened in the past few years, there are many of them now. I'd say product-led growth is definitely the most popularized, thanks predominantly to, organizations like OpenView. But the sort of idea around this, X-led sort of ideas are, where does the most growth come from? So we often describe it as, if you're at a sales-led organization, you predominantly would look to sales and a sales team and a sales motion for the majority of growth your company would experience. If you think about a marketing-led organization, early days of HubSpot, very, very marketing-led, predominantly their growth came from their being very sort of loud in the market and, teaching about inbound marketing and things like that, and basically generating demand in the market, very marketing led. My last in-house role was also very marketing led. Marketing was looked to for the majority of growth in the company. There's also engineering led, right? Where you think about companies like Facebook, where, small tweaks and, in, let's say, I won't say button color, but, we might get there with large organizations that are dealing with tons of data. Very small changes like that can have a huge impact. And so you might think of that more on the sort of engineering side of things. And then, there's community-led growth as well. Probably don't need to explain that. I think I've also heard rumblings of like content-led growth as well. But product-led growth is really that idea that you can leverage your product and product experiences to acquire new customers, activate customers in a low-touch way that basically builds, your product and demand for your product over time, and you eventually sort of monetize that experience. So you could think about like freemium products. Product-led sales comes into that as well. A lot of product-led companies that leverage product-led sales have leveraged product-led growth first in order to power a product-led sales motion. So that's mostly how we think about it. We were definitely not big fans of throwing yet another X-led anything into the mix, but genuinely it felt like it was missing. This was in early 2019. Claire and I were together at a conference and chatting about this like model that we had sort of developed together based on her background and my background. And we were like, what's missing? Like, where's the customer in all of these growth models? Where nobody talks about the customer at sales-led, if for sales-led models or for product-led models. And we just think it is so much easier to build product-led experiences and sales-led experiences and marketing-led experiences if you understand inherently your customer at this sort of deeper level. You can build so many better experiences for them, either programmatically or just by virtue of your team having that intel about your customers. Too many teams are guessing, and they really don't need to, because customer research is actually a lot more approachable than what most people think. I don't even like to use the term customer research if I don't have to, but a lot of teams that are product-led and sales-led, I don't want to just pick on product-led companies, but product-led companies are particularly at an advantage when they're customer-led. But a lot of them are guessing as to what they should build, how they should build it, the words they should use, their messaging and positioning, their onboarding. They're just using intuition or guessing, and they really don't need to, because they could get it right the first time by deeply understanding customers first.
By the way, I heard another /led
growth. What's the latest?
So the latest is personal-led growth. So like inspired by companies such as Skim of Kim Kardashian or Kylie Cosmetics. So people that do have a large following, that are influencers and stuff that drive people to the product. And then the product is really tied to your person, how much you show of yourself on social media, how you're perceived, but also we've seen this, for example, with a famous Italian fashion influencer, Chiara Ferragni. It's also tied to like your personal life, meaning that if you do something and you get in trouble, also the product suffer with you.
Right. Yes, totally. I'm not sure I agree with the name of it, but I totally get it. It does make sense.
I'm not sure if it was personal or person-led growth. I don't remember. Something like that.
Hey,
I saw it on LinkedIn.
It sounds like it could work for sure. But at the end of the day, even with this one, and like, thanks for raising a more recent example, even in that scenario, still understanding what motivates those customers. Again, at the foundation is really understanding your customers. All of these models benefit from that, even this one.
Absolutely. So let's close this parenthesis because I would like to know what then, and that's the $1 million question, what does it look like to build a product in a customer-led organization? I heard you talking about the guesswork, right? So how do we take out the guesswork to build something that our customers really want?
So I'm glad you asked this question, because it's a really good one that I almost never get asked, actually. So I do appreciate you asking it. I think this it is very popular to refer to your business as customer centered or customer led or customer driven, or whatever the term is. We all like to think of ourselves as customer led. We all inherently know that we are in the business of helping customers get value, but for the vast majority of companies that we see, not to throw anybody under the bus, but for the most part, it's kind of lip service, because though they may have a great customer success team or great customer support, they haven't actually operationalized that customer understanding in a way that all the teams across the organization can actually act on, understand, that is unambiguous, that is defensible, that, that teams can sort of lean into and figure out what does success look like for my part of this business and for my part of the customer's experience. Very, very few teams, I would argue almost no one, other than these companies that we've worked with, have actually done that in a good way. Now, there are some examples. So Guru is a great example of this. They legitimately have operationalized the customer experience. It is embedded into how they operate. That's sort of our MO as well, is to really provide the team with tools that they need to make really smart decisions and really good decisions, and make new mistakes, so to speak, and not guess. And so the way that we advocate for doing that is by doing sort of this zoom out macro sort of focused research on who is your best customer, and leveraging the jobs to be done framework, more the sort of Clay Christensen, Bob Mesta version of jobs to be done, and really understanding like what is it that customers are hiring your product to do. There is likely going to be more than one job to be done that you'll identify for your customers. But if you can understand that sort of documentary of how your best customers came to like meet and fall in love with and have this long relationship with your product, if you can understand that documentary of your customer's experience with you, you can operationalize it by identifying what those key milestones in their sort of relationship with you are, those key value milestones. You can identify ways to measure those milestones through the lens of your customer getting value, right, which we call like customer value milestones. We talk a lot about KPIs and KPI development for each of those milestones. How will we know that we have done a good job at helping our customers get to a moment of value? Those are our leading indicators of success that influence our lagging indicators of success, like revenue growth, for example. So if we can operationalize that customer experience in that way and hand that to the team to not only learn from and internalize and build strategies around, but also build upon over time, that is when I would consider a company to be genuinely customer-led, where they've got the value to the customer at the center of how all the teams operate. Again, focused on leading indicators of success around delivering customer value that influence those lagging indicators of success.
Okay, I love this. Let's unpack a few things step by step. So first of all of these stands on the premise that you know who's your customer,
It does,
right?
Yes.
That's the initial assumption of everything. But it's not actually so obvious, especially in B2B, who's your customer. Yep. I'll give you an example. Yep. Like when I was the head of product at this prop tech startup that was doing content creation for real estate companies. So imagine like videos, photos of apartments, drone shooting and stuff like that, right? We had customers from every single walk of life. We had, for example, real estate developers, real estate agents. We had marketing agencies, right? That had nothing to do actually with the real estate part. So we had big customers, like small customers, medium customers, like all sorts of things. Furthermore, the customer that used the product is not the same as the decision maker. So the person that, especially at big companies, is the one that makes the decision of, okay, we're getting the software, we're going to implement it in our company, right? So how do I go about defining ideal customers in these B2B scenarios, right?
Yeah. This is such a common issue. This happens all the time. The vast majority of the companies that reach out to us are in that situation. However, what I would say is typically if you're sitting with the leadership team at that company, typically they've got their eye on a particular segment of those customers that they're particularly interested in for one reason or another. They've identified a big need in the market or a gap in the market. They've identified, hopefully by looking at the data, a segment of customers that have a big need, are easy to acquire, low cost to acquire, and high LTV. They stick around for a long time. Hopefully you're able to identify in your customer base where that sweet sort of spot is. That may or may not correspond with a genuine customer segment. A customer segment is a really loaded term because segmentation means something different to every company. But when I talk about customer segments, I mean, in your example, the difference between a sort of, the real estate agents would be a segment, marketing agencies who serve real estate agents would be another segment, and then maybe your real estate developers would be another potentially. So those would be genuinely different groups of customers that use your product in genuinely different ways. They have they need and care about different features. The hierarchy of those features, the must-haves, their deal breakers will be very different from one segment to the next. So bearing in mind segments for a second, like it's important to know who those segments are. But even more than that, there's generally a segment of customers or a group of customers where the leadership team, generally the founders, are like, we have our eyes on this group of customers because we see an opportunity here and we can pursue that, basically validating that. But every once in a while, there is a team that comes to us that's like, we have this big slew of customers because, like maybe in your scenario, but an example I have in my mind is an invoicing tool for basically anybody to generate invoices on their phone on the go. How do you choose what your best customers? They have hundreds of thousands of customers that range in all kinds of ways. This is actually why we leverage the jobs to be done methodology for the research that we do, because it's not about industry or company size or profile or demographic data. It's really about what are people trying to accomplish with this tool? How do those break down in groups across your customer base? And which of those customer jobs do we feel like we're really well equipped to serve today? They have an urgent need in the market, a high willingness to pay. They don't need to be convinced. They're low cost to acquire. Like there's this sweet spot in amongst your customer base generally. And if you can find that sweet spot based on that criteria and maybe other criteria that is relevant in your situation, maybe it's an industry that you've got an unfair advantage in or something like that. But if you can find that sweet spot and zoom in, that's where you go to learn about customers. You don't do these broad quant surveys across your entire customer base unless you genuinely do not know who they are. Quant surveys can be really helpful in that scenario for figuring out like who's all in here. And then let's narrow down and run some reporting on like, where high LTV and high retention, sit, or cost to acquire customers or things like that. But again, once you identify that sweet spot of customers, that's where you drill in to learn what are the customer jobs that exist inside of that sweet spot of customers. And then once you've identified the jobs to be done in there, you can really make a decision around who do we actually want to be for? Who do we want to be? Whose problem do we genuinely want to solve? And then you can focus all of your efforts and your team on that. Other customers may come along and that's fine, but that doesn't mean that you need to, just welcome everybody in necessarily, right? You should staying focused. If you're speaking to everyone, you're speaking to no one. So really remaining focused. That's how you increase conversion rates on your website. That's how you increase your trial to paid conversion rate. That's how you keep retention and engagement high in your product, is by focusing and zooming in on those customers that you actually care about and on what they actually care about, and getting really, really crystal clear on that. I don't know if that 100% answered your question, but that's how we go about it to help companies, again, outside of demographic data, outside of, any sort of typical ICP type of data or persona data or job titles or age and location and things like that, is what's the problem that we're solving and for who, and how can we do that better?
Yeah, I guess that we can go much deeper then into define the problem that we are solving. Yeah. So I heard you mention the framework Jobs to be done, and I had Tony Ulvik in the past as a guest on the podcast, but I'm very curious to know your take on Jobs to be done, because I know that you apply it differently following the other philosophy regarding the method.
There's a couple of, I believe Bob Mesta refers to himself as the co-architect because he worked very closely with Clay Christensen on this. I am not a Jobs to be done. I don't consider myself to be a Jobs to be done expert. Really, Claire Selentrop, my business partner, she came into this partnership with me with that research background. And as soon as I learned what Jobs to be done was and what that methodology was, I had my second sort of eureka moment. I had my first eureka moment when I discovered really meaningful customer experience mapping. And then my second when I discovered Jobs to be done, thanks to Claire. But basically our way of thinking about it is how I was saying before, is sort of understanding that documentary of your customer's experience. So if you can identify this sweet spot of customers, you can look at them in such a way that you can kind of reverse engineer their experience. You can look back at what was going on in their world that led them to seek out something new, right? It's often referred to as like the trigger moment or the struggling moment. If you can identify, if you can, learn more about and get the context around that struggling moment from one of your best customers of what that was like for them, all these, like the world of marketing and distribution and messaging sort of opens up to you on the front end of that customer experience, because you understand the context in which not only they discovered they needed a new solution, but also the solution that they were struggling with, right? What solution are they firing in order to hire yours? Where do they go when they decide, like, I can't do this anymore, so to speak, today's the day that I'm going to solve this problem. I can't do this anymore. Where do they go? Who do they talk to? Do they talk to their colleagues? Do they listen to a podcast? Do they read a publication? How do they make that decision? What are the words that they use to describe the pain that they're experiencing? Just to like double click on that. If you can identify the words your ideal customers use to describe their struggle and the pain that they're experiencing, imagine how powerful that is to apply that to the messaging on your website. Because today we are not in the vitamin business, we are in the painkiller business. There's not one business that I can think of today that can afford to be selling a vitamin. We have to be selling a painkiller in this environment, especially in B2B SaaS right now. And so you have to understand what that pain and struggling moment looks like. Otherwise, you'll be guessing, and you won't be able to articulate and use the language that's really going to resonate with that pain. So again, I'm only describing the struggling moment at the very beginning of this, but that's the sort of genesis of where your relationship with your customer starts. They don't even know who you are yet, but that context is unbelievably important for you. And then you understand basically how they discover you, when they landed on your website, what was it about your solution or your product that convinced them to give it a try? People are really reluctant to hand over even just an email address these days. So like, what was it about your solution that convinced them to hand that over, even if it's a freemium product? Giving an email address, I mean, people think, oh, the barrier is so low, there's a freemium product. But even that is a big ask these days. People don't like to, waste their time or get marketed to and get a bunch of emails. Everybody knows when you sign up for a freemium product, you're about to get hit with a bunch of emails. So it is still a big ask to ask somebody to try your product. So what was it about it that convinced them to hand that over and take that, what I like to sort of refer to as like a leap of faith in their relationship with you, that first sort of leap of faith. And then once they get into the product for the first time and sort of see that experience, I say product, but obviously this could apply in a lot of scenarios. But what then happens to them that reassures them that they're in the right place, that sometimes we refer to it as first value, but a lot of folks will also refer to it as like a first aha moment or activation. Basically, it's it's kind of centered around this idea that 70% of people who sign up for a product log in once and never come back. So we need to get them to a moment of value very, very quickly. And once we've done that, then we can start to slowly sort of show them the rest of the things. The problem is, or the rest of the, the features and what else your product can do. The problem is that the vast majority of companies just throw the kitchen sink at customers as soon as they show up. They throw all the features at them, all the stuff that they're excited about, that they think matters, but not the most important thing to these customers that they need to see. I don't know how you would know that if you weren't doing some level of customer research. How would you know what order to introduce your product, what parts of the product to introduce in what order? That's what we often are learning when we're conducting customer research. So showing them, the most relevant thing for them to convince them to keep going in their journey. I'm moving along the journey here, right? And then the next point after sort of first value is generally what we want to help our customers get to value realization. And we describe value realization as they trust and they trust, they believe, or they have experienced that solving of their customer job for the first time. They're like, Eureka, this thing is going to solve my problem. Now I'm willing to invite my team, if that's a reality in the situation. Now I'm willing to give over some more meaningful data or connect my tools or whatever that happens to mean for your tool. That's when you can ask for a little bit more engagement from them, but not before. So they might be ready for additional features then. And then really critically in recurring revenue businesses like SaaS, value realization is the start of the story. That's when things start to get interesting. That's when the evaluation phase kind of ends, because really recurring revenue businesses, they live and die by continued value and long-term relationships. So value realization is not enough. You have to be delivering continued value over time. Otherwise, you are never going to retain that customer. And then where SaaS gets really interesting and why people start SaaS businesses to begin with is like that expansion opportunity, right? When we're talking about net revenue retention, when we're talking about our customers using our product in more sophisticated ways or using more of our sort of value metric, right? If you have a value-based pricing model, for example, they'll be using it to larger degrees. They'll be adding more team members, whatever that happens to be. They might move from monthly to annual. There's all kinds of things that can happen over in value growth. So generally, we think about it as the struggle phase, the evaluation phase, and the growth phase. And each of those phases break down a little bit differently depending on your product. But in general, there's the problem space. They express some sort of interest in trying your tool. You want to get them to first value. Then you want to get them to value realization. Then you want to get them to continued value. And then you get them to value growth. And so that's the sort of way that we think about operationalizing that documentary of your customer's experience with you, which is based on that job to be done. Did I go like granular and then zoom out enough? Hopefully I did.
Yes, absolutely. And since it's a lot of things that you just give us this amazing overview, basically, of the entire framework, I wonder if we can go through an actual example based on your experience, maybe like a company that you can talk about that you implemented this in the past so that it becomes crystal clear for listeners how they should go about implementing this.
Yes, I'm trying to think of which one. I mean, I already mentioned that invoicing tool. And actually, they're called Invoice Simple. I can give their name. We had the president of Invoice Simple as a guest on our podcast, our very little baby, brand new podcast. He was one of our first episodes, so I can speak about that one. And it's I've already mentioned it, so I might as well. So in their situation, they, as I mentioned before, they had hundreds of thousands of customers, low ACV, these like micro businesses. I could also speak about like the opposite end of the spectrum because we also work with like very complex technical products in like the enterprise space. So I feel a bit odd like swinging the pendulum to like the complete opposite direction. I feel like I should probably pick something in the middle, but let's just go with this Invoice Simple example. They've been around for a while and they have hundreds of thousands of these small companies, right, paying them. And I say companies, and I almost don't mean companies. It's borderline in the prosumer space. It's borderline B2C. So it's these micro businesses like contractors or, consultants, or, solopreneurs, or just very, very small organizations, generally one or two people, maybe three, like the businesses that they serve. So when Dan Stewart reached out to us, they were running lots of tests inside of the product. The product team was, iterating on these little sort of experiences. They were doing a lot of UX research and iterating and A/B testing inside of the product. And they were very sort of data led, as a lot of these, companies are. And he sort of recognized this like forest for the trees, where actually, do we actually know who our best customers are? Do we actually know who we're solving this problem for? Because the team sort of operated based on this like legacy understanding of customers from the inception of the business, which is what happens a lot, right? Founders start businesses that they had a problem with. And so we are our customer, we know. And so at the beginning of a company, generally the founding team is very close to the problem and is very close to the customer because they are the customer. But over time, obviously, this isn't always the case. And also over time, the team grows, the market changes, the product changes, right? Even if we're talking a year later, especially in an early stage scenario, your product looks very different 6 months, at a time. And so this was, again, the case for Invoice Simple, where their understanding of customers was based on a legacy understanding of their customers. And so he wanted to just, have this work serve as a forcing function to zoom out and really validate our best customers actually who we think they are. And in this situation, I have to talk about the research, basically. So we started with quant research, with quant surveys. From the quant surveys, we were able to narrow down a sweet spot of customers. And in that sweet spot of customers, based on a couple of criteria, which we can talk about if you want to, we decided to reach out to a certain group of them for interviews. And then we ran interviews with, I believe, about a dozen or so customers, and ran jobs to be done style interviews where we tried to understand that documentary of their relationship with this product. What was going on in their world? What convinced them to try this solution? What can they do now that they weren't able to do before? All that type of stuff. So we ran those interviews, and what we discovered was there were about 3 or 4 different jobs to be done, themes across these 12 customers. But what we realized, there was 2 standout groups. And because we had these quant surveys, we could also identify that there was a large group of customers that came starting their business for the first time. I need an invoicing solution. They're not comparing, they haven't had an invoicing solution before. So they would sign up for the product. They'd be very happy. Perfect. This is what I needed. And then, as what happens with new businesses, a lot of them would churn out. Their businesses would fail. Some of them would stick around, but generally they were very happy with this product, but they didn't always stick around for a very long time. On the flip side of that, there was another group. It was a smaller group of customers. They weren't as happy when they came through the front door, but that's partially because customization meant everything to them. They were established businesses. They had been using a Word doc or a Google Sheet or some sort of, or an over-engineered tool like QuickBooks, that gave them too much. And they wanted to simplify, and they wanted to start invoicing on the go. They had established businesses. So when those customers signed up, they were a lot more discerning. They were looking for customization because they wanted to recreate their very specific needs. So their NPS, for example, wouldn't have been as high early in their customer experience. But when they saw that this tool could do all of this customization, they were like, hell yes, this is the solution for me. And they would drill in and basically become a really high value, high LTV customer, because they'd be sending lots of invoices over time, and they would expand their usage with the tool. So if the team had just continued the way they were, they would have treated all of these customers as equal. You can imagine that the messaging for one of these customers would be very different than another, right? One is starting a business. It's not firing an old solution. They've got stars in their eyes. They're, starting for the first time, versus another business owner, like a micro business owner, that is like, I want to send an invoice for my truck when I outside, my customer's house or my client's house. I want my invoice to look a certain way. This QuickBooks is over-engineered. This, Google Sheet is, takes me too much time and I can't do it on my phone. They're in a very different headspace than that first group of customers that I described. So zeroing in on that ideal high LTV customer makes a world of difference, not only for your messaging, but also in how you introduce your tool, in what parts of the product you show them in what order once they get into the product, and in your expectations for their LTV and the expanded usage of their tool and things like that. So that is a good example of a team that was doing inherently all the right things, being very data led and very data driven, having tons of data to back up every decision that they were making, but they were sort of missing the forest for the trees. And so when they zeroed in on that better fit customer for them, able to refine their messaging, able to refine their early product experience, and also their expectations for customer retention and expansion.
I love this. And I guess this is a perfect example of the difference between product-led versus customer-led, right?
That's exactly right. Yeah. Because being customer-led in that scenario basically facilitated them being a lot more product-led. But we often talk about it as like, you shouldn't be data-led. You should be customer-led and data-informed. And when you're those two things, then you can be successfully product-led.
Yeah. And I'm fascinated by how you shift basically the ideal customers from what they thought was initially their ideal customers to these higher LTV value customers that was not actually happy with the product. This is very counterintuitive, actually.
Right. And had the team continued to just look at something like NPS early in a customer experience, which a lot of teams do, it was a very misleading indicator of how effective their onboarding was, because their onboarding looked more effective with one group than another. They weren't pulling those two segments apart and looking at them in isolation. So they thought their product onboarding was doing a great job, but their retention was not where they knew it could be. And so we had to sort of reverse engineer the experience to figure out actually what that early product experience should look like is quite a bit different. You should be showing off these different parts of the product and setting different expectations. And when I say different expectations, what I mean is like setting a different KPI and measuring, success differently than you have been. It's not just about converting to a paid customer. It's about reaching a moment of value in the product. Again, kind of like the leading indicators versus lagging indicators, part of the conversation that we were having earlier.
Yeah, absolutely. I wonder, how do you redefine those criteria actually? Like, how do you understand that this type of customer that is very unhappy with you is actually higher LTV value and you should focus on this person? And most of all, how do you convince the organization that this is the path to follow? Because there is also then a matter of changing,
right? Organizational change.
Yeah, there's it's like everyone says that, but people are inherently, oh my God, did I say that correctly? Inherently,
yeah.
Inherent. I'm not going to cut this. I'm going to leave it. Averse to change. Especially,
I was going to say, I'm not sure that I agree with that when it comes to product teams, or even like in this case, the president of the company, for all intents and purposes, the founder, coming with really wanting to get smarter. It's hard to deny customer data like this. So the way that we tackle it is making sure that we're really putting that customer data at the forefront. Of course, we have a background in this, and we've done this with hundreds of companies. And of course, I've got my experience and expertise that I bring to the table. But at the end of the day, nothing is more powerful and convincing than your customers, especially the customers that are low cost to acquire, understand what you do inherently, are, stick around for a long time, are those high LTV customers. Those people, they're very convincing to product leaders, to the company leaders. So there's not a lot of convincing that this is the better way, because the data speaks for itself generally. What becomes hard is actually changing the way the team operates. That's the hard part. And that's actually why we do the customer experience mapping process as part of it. That's why customer experience mapping and KPI development is part of the customer-led growth framework, because it's all fine and dandy to learn, more about your customers, but if you don't actually operationalize those customer insights, it's the type of research that dies on a shelf classically, right? So our process for doing this is sitting down in a room with all the critical sort of, I'll say go to market leaders, but also the founders or whoever the senior leaders happen to be in that scenario that have to be in the room. Generally, we would say, any of the sort of founding teams and leaders, like I mentioned, head of product, head of marketing, head of sales, head of customer success, basically the big decision makers with this customer experience and the product experience. If those folks can get into a room and together see each other's faces when they learn these insights about customers, there's no denying that we all know now who our best customers are, and we all have a responsibility to change. And so the tool that we give them to sort of enable that change is a customer experience map, and basically helping them figure out what are these leaps of faith, these milestones in the customer's relationship that they can operationalize around and sort of measure the experiences that they're building against. And we have a conversation with them about the KPIs. The KPIs are not always obvious. They as an outsider, we would never be able to supposed to know better than the team on what those KPIs should be. So there is a discussion there that we facilitate to help get down to what is the most meaningful measure of somebody getting to a value moment that we can act on. Because it's just as important to know that a customer reached a stage in their customer milestone as it is to know that they haven't. And so, because we need to take action in either scenario. If they have reached it, great, we can be proactive in helping them to get to the next. But if they haven't, then we can be reactive in helping them get back in. Because like I mentioned before, right, 70% of people who sign up for a product log in once and never come back. If we don't have the mechanisms in place to tell us that we lost them and actually go back to their inbox and remind them, or some other mechanism, and remind them why they signed up, the problem that they had, what we can do for them, why this is relevant, use that voice of customer to really hit with like, we can solve this problem for you, and we can solve this job to be done to get them back into the product. We're literally leaving money on the table. Not literally, but we're leaving money on the table. And there's an opportunity to do that at every single one of these milestones. I'm telling you the most obvious, right? When somebody falls out of our onboarding, yes, email them back to try to get them back into the product. But there's an opportunity to do that at value realization, like at product engagement. There's an opportunity to do that at continued value. If somebody stops regularly using your tool in the way that shows you that they're happy and healthy, if they become a churn risk, then you need to be proactive in getting them back. And also if they stay there for a certain amount of time, then they become amazing sort of opportunities for expansion and growth and monetization, whatever that looks like for your organization, whether or not that's product-led sales or, a lower touch product-led motion, which we might call customer marketing, and sort of the expansion space. So there's so many opportunities that teams can sort of take advantage of across the entire customer experience. And so we provide that map as a way of highlighting those and making it really obvious. And then those leaders sit there and they recognize, oh, that's my part. I'm responsible for this. I'm responsible for this. My team lives over here. And they start to associate their work with these KPIs, these leading indicators of success around helping customers reach moments of value, because they can see themselves and their work and their team represented in this customer's experience, which makes it a lot more actionable.
That's amazing. What does the mapping look like, actually? Is it like a real map on the wall, or what does it look like?
We tend to use tools like Miro, any whiteboarding tool. I used to use Lucid Chart. So there's lots of whiteboarding tools that you can use. FigJam, there's many. So customer experience mapping, how we tend to think about it is it's meant to sort of document that holistic customer experience. So a lot of customer journeys that you'll see, if it's a marketing team doing a customer journey, generally it's like it's heavy on the buying side, right? And that decision-making space on the front end. If it's a product team making a customer journey map, or a user journey map. It's very detailed and zooms really into sometimes even just micro experiences. So this is a little bit more macro in that customer's experience. It's the high level customer experience. So sometimes we'll work with teams and we'll do nested customer experience maps that live under that top level one. But really the one that I'm describing to you right now, which is about like change management, is really that macro level of here are the key milestones in your customer's relationship with you that you have to get right. And that just the act of unpacking it and sort of mapping it opens up all kinds of opportunities, right? Because the next step that we take and why this exercise is so valuable is basically like, okay, now we have this customer experience map. We know what the major milestones are because we understand our customers. Now let's look at what we're doing today. And when we do this with companies, we describe this in the book as well, but when we basically describe it as kind of like secret shopper. So you would go through your entire customer experience from looking at the marketing that you're doing, going to your website, signing up, for the product, experiencing the onboarding, experiencing that, more advanced usage of the product, basically do that secret shopper thing, wearing the hat of that customer with that customer job to be done. And you will find all of the ways that your current customer experience is out of alignment with what those ideal customers need. And all these opportunities are going to flood to the surface. We use basically we have our milestones identified like in a Miro board. And then below all of those milestones, we have all the opportunities that we identified, because below that we have like screenshots and visuals and markup and comments and post-it notes all around these experiences that we can now look at with this new understanding of customers and see all the ways that it's out of alignment. And so we sort of we map the entire thing and then figure out what are the biggest sort of levers that we have here. What are the biggest opportunities for growth? All of those ways that you're out of alignment with that ideal customer experience. And we help teams to basically prioritize them because there's generally many. And so it can be a little bit overwhelming. So we basically work to refine them and figure out like what is going to drive the most amount of value with the lowest lift from the team. And when we run these workshops, like I'm describing with these team leaders, they love it because we're trying to, be obviously sensitive to what they've already got in play, what's on the roadmap already, what is the right order of how these things should be implemented and executed. And it really, really helps with prioritization. And the most valuable part about it, and this is totally on their team side, is that they're all in the room having this conversation together. And that's a really, really critical part of change management. That's really a critical, important part of this framework as well.
I wonder, once you do all this work and everyone at the table is like, okay, cool, we know who are we building for, we know what their jobs to be done are, we know how to measure if we're building the right thing and if they are engaging with it, but how do we let those customers know that we are building something for them? I imagine that this will require, especially if you change or if you become very specific around a certain type of customers that you're building for, you need to rethink sort of your messaging, your positioning, your communication, etc. So I wonder, how do you go about doing this sort of, it's like actually a repositioning in this case?
It's not always a repositioning. So for your existing customer base, nothing changes. You may want to, what you're going to end up wanting to do is look at your existing customer base and figure out, okay, who are these customers who are at risk and who are our happy, healthy customers. And if you can break them down in that way, then you can figure out how to move forward with each of them. One, obviously, in a more reactive way to try to get them back to value, and the other, maybe an opportunity for expansion. But that's kind of you would probably want to do that after. What I didn't say before is that it's true that 10 times out of 10, when we work with companies, their messaging needs to be updated. I wouldn't necessarily say their positioning. And there's a big difference between those two things. Generally, it's the messaging that we find they may want to do a repositioning exercise. In fact, if you haven't had April Dunford on your podcast, you should. So April, we love the companies who have just worked with April Dunford because they just rethought their positioning. They've got a lot more clarity on where they want to go with their business. And that makes the conversation of, okay, who are the customers that we're going to learn from a lot easier. But that all said, once you've done this learning about customers, it's generally your messaging that gets updated. So, you'd want to revisit your value propositions and your homepage and maybe some product pages, potentially your pricing and packaging, but you don't that's not a requirement necessarily. Generally, just updating your messaging on your website can do a ton to bring in higher quality customers. So a great example of that actually is a company that I worked with where we did this work. We identified that they, kind of similar to the invoicing tool that I mentioned, had been sort of marketing to the wrong customer all along. And when we refined their messaging on their website conversion rate went up by 90%. But the way more interesting part of this story is that their trial to paid conversion rate also increased 40%. And we didn't touch anything but 3 pages on their website. We didn't touch their post sign up experience, didn't touch it. But because there was a higher quality customer coming through the front door and signing up for the product, the trial to paid conversion rate increased 40%. So that was just a website update. That was just a messaging update that was made. Nothing in the product changed. Nothing in the sign up flow changed at all, just website. So that's a great example of just website messaging getting updated on the front end of it. But generally where we go after that, because it is the biggest lever, the biggest sort of deficit for the team, is that early product experience, because so many teams fall prey to throwing the kitchen sink at their new customers, showing them all the toys in the toy box. And so we basically help them to figure out how to introduce their product in a way that's going to help customers get to first value and then value realization as effectively as possible, and with the messaging. And often the product doesn't need to change at all. Often it's just the way you present the product, either in emails or in some sort of onboarding flow. You don't have to, engineers don't necessarily have to get involved, basically. So that's kind of the next place you would go as well is, yes, your website should get updated, but your early product experience should also be updated with that new sort of hierarchy of understanding of what's important to your customers. So it sounds very broad when I'm describing all those leaders in a room looking at the holistic customer experience, but really there are very specific ways to drill in and implement.
Amazing. I have one last question, and we're going a little bit backward here, but I haven't asked you something when you were talking about jobs to be done, and because you were talking and I put like an asterisk, I'm like, okay, I'm going to come back later. And then we just went on with the conversation. But it's how do you prioritize the jobs that those customers have? Let's say that you don't have like infinite product teams that can work at once on every possible, problem that those customers have. And you have to pick a few of those, 1 or 2. How would you go about understanding, okay, this is going to be the jobs that if we solve these, that's going to unlock the greatest value for our users?
Earlier, I was talking about understanding, like finding that sweet spot of customers in your customer base.
Yeah.
And once you do that and can run some research, so I was describing the process of running like 12 interviews. Generally, after 12 interviews, we start to see patterns emerge, like meaningful patterns emerge. After about 12, you get to sort of saturation, so to speak, and no new patterns start to emerge. So that's basically where you want to get to in terms of like, okay, let's take stock now of this group of customers and identify the jobs to be done in this group. And so with the invoicing tool, I'll just use that one as an example. We basically found, I believe there were even 3 or 4 jobs to be done, but about 3 stand out in our minds. And we basically wanted to know, we had to make a decision with the team of those 2 customer jobs, the new business and then the business that wanted mobile invoicing. which one of these groups of customers do they want to focus on? Because there's a genuine decision to be made there. That first group represents a massive market, right? We would not want a massive opportunity. We would not want to erroneously, disqualify those customers from the running, because there is a viable path forward with that group of customers if they wanted there to be. I could actually describe the exact same situation with that marketing tool where I was describing about the website survey, or I'm not sorry, not the website survey, but the website updates. But would that be helpful to bring another example in of like how we helped them decide which was going to be their best customer?
I think so, because like the more example that you gave, like listeners love examples.
Yeah. Okay, let me think. There's a lot of examples that I could provide. I'm trying to think of which is the best to sort of lean into. So we use a rubric of how to make a decision between if multiple customer jobs come up when you do this research, of deciding which customer job you want to move forward with. We used to actually just bring a rubric up on the screen of, it's are they a market that is addressable, right? Like, do you have any sort of unique or unfair advantages with one of these customer jobs over another? Do they have a high willingness to pay? Probably the most important one is, do they have urgency around solving this job to be done? Is there urgency there? If there's even an ounce of apathy around solving it, or resistance, or, needing to convince them that they have a problem, like, remove them from the list. So there's basically a set of criteria that you would go through to help make that decision. Truth be told, it's often quite obvious. The business leaders know. They look at the two and they're like, I've thought about these two groups of customers before. I understand now that why they're being pulled apart in this way. And I'm excited about this group. My product team is excited about this group and solving for this group, and it makes it a lot more obvious. I'm trying to think of situations where it's less obvious, and that's more when the leadership has less clarity around the direction that they want to take the company. So sometimes I've had conversations with founders where they haven't even yet made a decision on whether or not they want to be product-led or sales-led. And that can sometimes be the determining factor. If this founder has a sales background, they're very comfortable with sales, they like, big deals, and they want those one-on-one interactions, and they've got experience building out and scaling out a sales team, they may want to choose the customer job that needs a higher touch and for bigger deals. On the other hand, if you've got a founder who's more product-led, a developer, loves technology, is excited for scale, democratizing, this tool that they're building, then they're going to want to pick a job to be done that is more focused and can acquire more customers at scale, and a job to be done that is, more conducive to a product-led sort of motion. So there's all kinds of ways that you can make this decision. At the end of the day, it's going to come down to, what kind of business do you want to build? Who are you excited to solve this problem for? It can sometimes sound ambiguous, but generally when we're talking to the founders or even the product owners in bigger companies, they know. We bring them the option. We say, look, we don't want to make this decision without you. And it's usually a pretty short conversation. And they're so grateful to have the line drawn between these two groups of customers, and they feel a sense of relief because they can relieve themselves of the burden of worrying about this other customer job and refocus the entire team about this one that they're all excited about.
I can absolutely see and understand that. Gia, I really want to thank you so much for this incredibly value-packed and generous conversation. Is there any place that you will suggest listeners go to if they want to reach out to you or explore additional resources?
Yeah, absolutely. Forgetthefunnel.com is our website. We've got some information on there about customer-led growth. Probably the best resource is the book. which is also called Forget the Funnel. We just launched a podcast. It's a very baby podcast, very brand new, but there's that too. But really at the end of the day, if this is a process that you think would be valuable for your team, just reach out and we're happy to help.
Okay, we will leave all the contacts and the links that you just mentioned in the show notes and YouTube description.
Awesome.
Gia, thank you so much for being here with me. It was amazing.
Thanks so much, Sarah.
And for listeners, see you on the next episode. Bye. That's all from today's episode. Thank you so much for watching or listening. If you find this episode valuable, you can subscribe to our YouTube channel or to the Polyweb podcast on Spotify, Apple, or your favorite podcast app. It will be fantastic if you could leave us a rating, a review, or a comment, as this really helps other listeners find the show. All the resources mentioned in this episode will be linked in the description and in the show notes. See you on the next episode. And if you cannot wait until next week, you can watch this episode right here that relates to some of the things that we talk about in this episode. Bye.